So let's talk nicotine analogs. What are they?
The first thing I would say is a nicotine analog is not nicotine.
Right.
So tobacco companies in the 70s, 80s, they took nicotine and added different groups onto nicotine to create totally new molecules and tested those molecules to see whether or not they would bind to the same receptor as nicotine. But it is not, nicotine analogs are not nicotine.
So is it synthetic nicotine then?
No. Synthetic nicotine refers to the way that nicotine is processed. So most nicotine is tobacco-derived, meaning it's extracted from the plant. Synthetic nicotine, you start with compounds and you actually produce nicotine, and it doesn't involve the plant.
So does this help, if you're an e-liquid manufacturer in the U.S. and you're trying to get through the PMTA process or even just sell your product, does it make it easier?
The nicotine analog?
Yeah.
So I would advise people that choose to use the nicotine analog to talk with their lawyers. But I've heard that the nicotine analogs are not regulated by FDA because they're not tobacco-derived nicotine or synthetic nicotine. They're not nicotine.
Rick, tell us about Nixodyne.
Nixodyne, I guess the birth of Nixodyne, it is the birth child of Bonguard Naturals, and then the parent company is Ready Mix Naturals. Nixodyne was invented, like Willie said, back in first discovered in the 50s and 60s. A small amount of work with that, and then it was developed later in the 70s and 80s by some big tobacco, some big companies. Did a lot of research into that, and then we've on a long journey. I've been in the nicotine industry for about 10 years, maybe a little longer, and we were looking for alternatives or pathways for our clients to continue to be in business and stay in business. And so we were looking at all kinds of different products, and we found some expired patents from these companies. I asked my attorneys and said, "Hey, can I repatent this? Can I patent this?" And they said, "No, not just if it's expired. If you can you improve on it?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely. If I made it into a vape, a pouch, a lozenge, a gum, a toothpick, a pouch, patch, anything, would that constitute?" And he called me back a little bit later. He said, "Yeah, absolutely." So a couple days later, we hired some organic chemists. Snell and Wilmer was our patent team, where they got some organic chemists. We got Willie with McKinney Regulatory Science Advisors up on board with us, and we started developing products. So Nixodyne now is actually a combination of different products. At first we had Nixamide, then Nixodyne, and then now it's an evolved version Nixodyne S, which is formulated after we did LD50 study to assess toxicity levels in that, and then we were able to basically get our product around to a 1-to-1 ratio against nicotine. So now there's no retooling necessary, there's no modifications to recipes, things like that. We ended up quantifying that data with a brain receptor study, and we used a flipper assay, I believe, to kind of show us that our Nixodyne responded at the same levels to the receptors in the brain as nicotine. And we did end up proving that.
Tell our audience a bit more about McKinney RSA.
So there are actually two McKinney companies. There's McKinney Regulatory Science Advisors, which was founded in 2000. I was with a big tobacco company, and typically those companies have a huge regulatory department, and they can put together applications. And I left that company and started this consulting firm to focus on companies that didn't have that infrastructure and help them put together applications and interact with FDA. And 3 years ago, I purchased a lab with some partners, and we own. The lab is called McKinney Specialty Labs, and it's the largest nicotine product testing lab in the United States. We test all nicotine products, and we're a 17025 ISO certified lab, and we do GLP tox studies as well.
So for Nixodyne, what exactly is the situation there?
Nicotine, very interesting product. So Rick approached us, McKinney Regulatory Science Advisors, and said, hey, I'd like to do some testing on my product. And so we immediately designed some tests and ultimately provided him guidance on the levels of 6-methyl-nicotine that should be in his product, where he would not harm folks and actually develop a product that's satisfying.
So are nicotine analogs currently deployed in any commercial sense? Can you buy a vape with it in it?
Oh, yeah, you can buy, there's somewhere around 40 different brands with, multitudes of flavors that at different strengths that are all out in the market. I mean, I don't know exactly how much, but I know that we're out. It's pretty significant. There are also pouches. There's a couple companies, dip.com, BTR is coming out. There's another brand called Strike coming out of Canada. A lot of people are involved with that. There's lozenges, there's gums coming out. There's any product that you can make with, nicotine, you could effectively make with Nixidine.
Is it the idea that this is not derived from a tobacco plant, so therefore it's not regulated by the FDA?
I think that, like I said in the beginning, is when we developed the product, it was an effort to keep our friends in business. Being in the raw product ingredient industry and distributing those products for so many years, you develop really close relationships. It's a community, and so I had to do my part, and then I had to help find this solution, and I did. Nixidine is that solution, and so at my point, it was to keep everybody in business. But we know what we found, something that could be potentially healthier than nicotine, and that's important for us because if it was more toxic, we couldn't sell it. If it was more addictive, and we believe that, we couldn't sell it. If it had any more increased harm potential, that we believed personally, we couldn't do it. So now we're working with the big dogs to try to establish those safety data sets. There's a ton of work to do.
What work is left to do? And Willie, why isn't a symposium like this important?
So what work is left to do? I think there's a lot of work left to do. So Rick is laying a solid foundation for the bulk product, the product that he sells. But given your question about what products are in the market, there's still work to understand how the consumer uses the product. Is the product satisfying to the consumer, the amount of 6-methyl-nicotine that reaches the blood? So there's still a lot that we need to understand. And then your question was what?
About the symposium here. Why is something like this important?
Well, it's extremely important so we can start the debate, start helping people understand, because there's some research that's been published that is not favorable and actually very misleading. And symposiums like this allow us to really talk about the facts as they exist rather than the perception and the narrative.
Great. And for you, Rick, why is K&H's symposium a good place to be?
Well, it allows you to connect with a lot of people that you wouldn't typically be able to, in a week. We're all very busy, but, you have some of the best and brightest in the rooms like today, and, we have a networking break coming up, we have a lunch coming up, and I know that we always bounce a lot of ideas off of each other, and where we can't really make those communications in a day, you're effectively doing a month's worth of connections here in a single day.